The arrow pierced the wooden post with such force that splinters exploded across Cordelia Whitmore's face as she hung laundry behind her cabin. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she stared at the crude piece of bark tied to the shaft. It says, surface marked with symbols she couldn't read but understood with primal clarity. A fame. Message written in her late husband's blood. 3 sons, she whispered, tracing the crimson marks with trembling fingers. He wants me to wait 3 days. Kiani Ironcloud had been watching her for months from the ridge above Cedar Hollow, his massive silhouette appearing and disappearing, like a mountain spirit. The other settlers whispered that he stood nearly 7 feet tall, that his war paint could freeze a man's soul, that he'd never taken a wife because no woman could match his fierce heart. They said he collected scalps like other men collected coins. Cordelia had seen something different in those distant observations. She'd caught glimpses of him teaching a small boy to track deer, heard his deep laughter echoing through the valley when the child stumbled over his own feet. A warrior, yes, but also a father. Her neighbor Prudence Millfield came rushing through the pines, her skirts catching on brambles. Cordelia. I heard the arrow strike merciful heavens. What does it say? It says I have a choice to make, Cordelia replied, her voice steadier than her hands. She pulled the arrow free, feeling its weight. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the fletching perfect. This wasn't a weapon of war, it was a work of art. You can't seriously be considering my husband's. Been dead 8 months, Prudence. The bank wants the land. Winter's coming, and I've got nothing left but pride. Cordelia tucked the arrow into her apron. Sometimes pride don't keep you warm. That first night, she barely slept. Every crack of a twig, every whisper of wind through true. The pines made her bolt upright, expecting to see Kiani's towering form in her doorway. Instead, she found small gifts appearing like morning dew, a perfectly preserved eagle feather on her windowsill, a bundle of medicinal herbs she'd never seen before, a piece of turquoise wrapped in soft deerskin. By the second day, her resolve began to waver. She'd heard stories of Apache marriages, of women taken as wives who learned to love their captors. But this felt different. The gifts weren't demands, they were questions, gentle inquiries into her heart. On the morning of the 3rd day, as dawn painted the mountains gold, Cordelia sat on her porch with her hands folded in her lap, wearing her best dress, the blue one with tiny flowers that her husband had loved. She'd made her decision sometime in the dark hours before sunrise, though she couldn't say exactly when courage had replaced fear. The sun climbed higher. Birds called from the forest. Her coffee grew cold in its cup. Then, as shadows began to shorten toward noon, she heard footsteps, but not the heavy tread she'd expected. Light, quick steps, like a deer picking its way through underbrush. A boy emerged from the tree line, perhaps 8 years old, with his father's proud bearing but gentler eyes. He approached slowly, respectfully, carrying himself like a young chief. He stopped 10 feet away and spoke in careful English, each word chosen with the precision of placed stones. My father says you are brave as mountain cat, beautiful as sunrise over sacred peaks. He says you wait 3 days, show honor. The boy paused, studying her face with surprising intensity. But I think maybe you wait for wrong question. Cordelia felt her carefully constructed composure crack like ice in spring thaw. This child Kiane's son stood before her with the gravity of a diplomat, his dark eyes holding wisdom that seemed far older than his years. What's your name, little one? She asked gently, rising from her chair. I am called Ayana, Eternal Blossom, because my mother said I would outlast all seasons. His voice carried a slight tremor, the first sign of his true age. She died when snow fell 3 winters past. The revelation hit Cordelia like a physical blow. She'd assumed many things about the great Apache warrior, but not that he was a widower like herself, not that he too knew the hollow ache of an empty bed and the weight of raising a child alone. Your father sent you to speak for him? Ayanna shook his head, sending his long black hair swaying. Father waits in canyon, preparing bride gifts. He thinks you will say yes because you're a strong woman who needs strong man. The boy's expression grew solemn, but I watch you many days. I see you cry when you think nobody sees. I see you talk to spirits of your dead husband. You're not ready for new warrior in your heart. Cordelia sank back into her chair, overwhelmed by the child's perception. Then why are you here? Because father is good man, but he forgets what it means to have soft heart. He thinks marriage is like treaty two sides agree, both get what they need. Ayanna stepped closer, his small hand resting on her porch railing. But I remember what it was like when mother looked at him like he was her whole sky. I remember how they whispered together by firelight, how she laughed at his stories even when she heard them many times. Tears blurred Cordelia's vision. Your mother sounds like she was a wonderful woman. She was. And she taught me that love cannot be captured like wild horse. It must come freely, like mountain stream finding its way to river. Ayanna's voice grew stronger, more confident. So I come to ask different question than father would ask. The boy drew himself up to his full height, every inch his father's son despite his youth. Will you marry my daddy not because you need protection, not because winter comes and you have no choice, but because his heart calls to yours across the darkness? Cordelia's breath caught in her throat. And if my answer is no? Then we go home and father learns to live with empty lodge. Better than false marriage that brings only duty, no joy. Ayanna reached into the leather pouch at his side and withdrew a small object wrapped in soft cloth. But if answer is yes, then I give you this, and you know that you join not just with father, but with son who already loves you like mother. He remembers. He unwrapped the cloth to reveal a carved wooden horse no bigger than her palm, worn smooth by countless small hands. The craftsmanship was breathtaking, every muscle, every flowing line of mane captured in perfect detail. Father made this for me when I was very small. His most precious thing I own. Ayanna held it out to her. If you take it, you promise to be not just father's woman, but Ayanna's new mother. You promise to teach me white man's words and let me teach you Apache ways. You promise to help father remember how to smile and let us help you remember how to sing. Cordelia stared at the carved horse, understanding finally that this wasn't about survival or convenience or even attraction. This was about building a family from the scattered pieces of two broken hearts. How long do I have to decide? Son travels to there. Ayanna pointed to a spot above the western peaks. Then father will come. If you hold horse when he arrives, he will know your heart speaks true. If not, the boy shrugged with the philosophical acceptance of his people. Then we say goodbye and wish you well in whatever path you choose. As the child melted back into the forest as silently as he'd come, Cordelia sat holding the tiny wooden horse, feeling its weight like the future itself balanced in her palm. The carved horse felt warm against Cordelia's palm as she sat alone, watching shadows lengthen across her small garden. 3 hours remained before Kiani would emerge from the canyon, and she found herself remembering things she'd buried beneath months of grief and practical worry. Her husband Jeremiah had been a gentleman, quick with a joke and slow to anger. But he'd also been predictable as sunrise, comfortable as an old quilt. Their love had been steady, dependable, born from shared hardship and common goals rather than the wild passion she'd read about in her grandmother's hidden novels. Now she closed her eyes and tried to imagine what it would feel like to be wanted by a man like Kiani Ironcloud, a warrior whose very presence seemed to command the wind and mountains. She'd seen him only from a distance, but even across the valley, his power was unmistakable. When he moved through the forest, deer didn't flee. They watched, recognizing a force of nature. "You're thinking too hard, Cordelia Whitmore." She spun around to find old Ezekiel Hawthorne leaning against her gate, his weathered face creased in what might have been amusement. The mountain man had appeared in Cedar Hollow 3 years ago like morning mist, speaking little but seeing everything. Rumor claimed he'd lived among various tribes for decades, that he understood languages most whites had never heard. "Ezekiel, you nearly stopped my heart." "Better than stopping your thinking, which is what you're trying to do." He pushed through the gate without invitation, moving with the easy confidence of someone who'd never met a boundary he respected. "Mind if I sit? These old bones don't hold conversations standing like they used to." She gestured to the spare chair. "I suppose you know why I'm out here." "No? Child, I was the one who told Kiani your husband was dead. I was the one who mentioned you were struggling alone." Ezekiel settled into the chair with a satisfied grunt. "Been watching this dance between you two for months. Time somebody spoke some sense. I don't understand." Kiana Cloud could have taken any woman he wanted from his own tribe or a dozen others. Apache women, Navajo women, even a few Spanish senoritas down south who'd have jumped at the chance to marry such a man. Ezekiel pulled out a Warren pipe and began packing it with tobacco. "But he chose you." "You know why?" Cordelia shook her head, afraid to guess. "Because he's been watching you tend that garden with hands that could have grown soft from grief. He's seen you split firewood when you thought nobody was looking. Seen you practice with that old rifle of your husband's until you could hit a playing card at 50 yards. Ezekiel struck a match. He's seen you sing while you work, heard you reading aloud to yourself from that book of poetry. He knows your strength and your softness both. But I don't know anything about him except stories." "Stories?" Ezekiel chuckled, smoke wreathing his grizzled features. "Let me tell you some. True things about Kiani Ironcloud. He's never killed a man who wasn't trying to kill him first. He once walked 60 miles through a blizzard to bring medicine to a sick white child in Tucson. He speaks 7 languages and can recite poetry in 3 of them." The old man's eyes grew distant. "And he hasn't touched a woman since his wife died, though plenty have offered. Why not? Because he made a promise to her spirit that he'd only love again if his heart called out like thunder in the mountains. He told me once, that marriage without that thunder is just 2 people sharing chores." Ezekiel pointed at the wooden horse in her hands. "That boy of his, he's got his mother's wisdom and his father's courage. If he gave you that carving, it means he sees something in you that reminds him of her." Cordelia looked down at the tiny horse, seeing new details in the fading light, the way its head was lifted as if scenting the wind, the proud arch of its tail. "I'm scared, Ezekiel. Course you are. Love's the most frightening thing there is, especially the kind that changes everything." He stood slowly, knocking ash from his pipe. "But fear's just excitement wearing a disguise. Question is, when that man walks out of those trees, will you be holding that horse because you're choosing safety, or because you finally heard your own thunder?" As Ezekiel disappeared into the gathering dusk, Cordelia realized she'd been gripping the wooden horse so tightly that its edges had left marks in her palm, marks that looked almost like the beginning of a brand. The sun touched the western peaks, exactly as Ayanna had predicted, setting the sky ablaze with colors that had no names. Cordelia stood in her doorway, the wooden horse clutched in her right hand, her heart hammering so hard she was certain it could be heard across the valley. Then she saw him. Kiani Ironcloud emerged from the tree line like a force of nature given human form. Even from 100 yards away, his presence seemed to fill the entire valley. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, but there was something else in his bearing, uncertainty, perhaps even vulnerability, though such words seemed impossible. When applied to a man of his stature, He dressed for ceremony. Eagle feathers adorned his long black hair, and traditional Apache garb had replaced the practical hunting clothes she'd glimpsed from afar. Turquoise and silver gleamed at his throat and wrists. But most striking were his empty hands, a warrior approaching with no weapons, offering only himself. As he drew closer, Cordelia felt her breath catch. Ezekiel's stories hadn't prepared her for the reality of the man. Yes, he was tall easily, 6.5 feet, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sky. But his face held intelligence and gentleness alongside its strength. This was no savage from dime store novels. This was a man who'd known love, loss, and the weight of leadership. He stopped 20 feet from her porch, well within rifle range, his dark eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her feel as though he could see straight through to her soul. When he spoke, his voice carried the deep resonance of distant thunder. "Cordelia Whitmore, I have come as I said I would. My son tells me you have questions that must be answered before hearts can speak truly." She stepped down from the porch, still clutching the wooden horse. Up close, she could see fine lines around his eyes, marks of laughter and sorrow both. "Your son is very wise. He carries his mother's spirit." She always saw what others missed. Kiani's expression softened slightly. "He also told me you might choose differently than I hoped. I want you to know this brings no shame. A heart cannot be commanded like a horse or convinced like a child. It chooses its own path." Cordelia felt something shift inside her chest, like ice breaking up on a spring river. Here was a man offering her freedom in the very moment he asked her to give it up. "I've been alone since my husband died," she said quietly. "Some days I wondered if I'd forgotten how to be anything else." "I know this loneliness," Kiani replied. "It becomes like shadow, always present, sometimes comfortable in its familiarity. But shadows disappear when the light grows strong enough," Cordelia found herself saying, surprising them both with her boldness. Something shifted in Kiani's expression, hope, perhaps, or recognition of something he'd been waiting to hear. In Apache tradition, when a man seeks a woman for wife, he must prove he can provide and protect. But you need no protection, you are strong like mountain oak. You need no providing, you make your own way. He paused, seeming to gather himself. "So I offer something different. I offer partnership. I offer a man who will stand beside you, not above you. I offer a heart that has been empty too long and a son who already calls you mother in his dreams." "And I would offer the same," Cordelia sighed, her voice growing stronger. "A heart that's been sleeping, awakening. A woman who's forgotten how to trust, learning again." She looked down at the wooden horse in her palm, then up at this magnificent man who'd somehow seen past her widow's weeds to the woman still living underneath. In that moment, she understood what Ezekiel had meant about thunder. It wasn't just excitement or fear, but the sound of a life breaking open to let something larger in. "Your son gave me this," she said, holding up the carved horse. "He said if I was holding it when you arrived, you'd know my heart spoke true." Kiani's eyes fixed on the small carving, and for a moment his composure cracked, revealing the depth of emotion he'd been holding back. "And what does your heart say, Cordelia Whitmore?" She took a deep breath, tasting possibilities on the wind. "It says yes, Kiani Ironcloud. It says yes to partnership, yes to family, yes to whatever thunder we make together." 3 weeks later, as October painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Cedar Hollow witnessed a wedding unlike any in its brief history. Cordelia had insisted on blending traditions, Apache and settler customs, woven together like complementary threads in a tapestry. The ceremony took place at sunrise in the meadow where she'd first seen Kiani watching from the ridge. Ezekiel Hawthorne served as translator and unofficial minister, while Ayana stood proudly as both ring-bearer and the one to formally present his new mother to his father's tribe. In Apache way, Ezekiel announced to the gathered crowd of settlers and tribal members, marriage is not taking possession, but creating new family unit. Two streams joining to make stronger river. Cordelia had spent weeks learning the intricate beadwork patterns that would adorn her wedding. Dressed traditional Apache designs incorporating symbols of her new life. The dress itself was her grandmother's silk, now decorated with turquoise and silver that caught the morning light like captured starlight. Kiani wore formal ceremonial attire, but pinned to his chest was a small photograph of Jeremiah Whitmore, Cordelia's way of honoring her first husband's memory while embracing her future. The gesture had moved the Apache warrior nearly to tears when she'd first shown it to him. Before Great Spirit and gathered witnesses, Ezekiel continued, these two hearts make promises that bind not just them, but all who call them family. The vows they spoke were simple but profound. Kianami promised to respect Cordelia's independence while offering his strength when she needed it. Cordelia vowed to honor his culture while sharing her own, to love his son as her own blood, and to build with him something neither could create alone. But it was Ayana who provided the ceremony's most moving moment. As his father and new mother exchanged rings, his grandmother's silver band and a turquoise circle Kiani had crafted himself, the boy stepped forward with a bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. I have wedding gift, he announced solemnly, for woman who promises to be mother to boy who never forgot first mother, but has room in heart for second. Inside the deerskin was a beaded headband, clearly the work of small, careful hands. The pattern was imperfect, but beautiful Apache thunderbirds soaring alongside what appeared to be English roses. Made it myself, Ayana said proudly as Cordelia knelt to his level. Grandmother helped with difficult parts, but design is mine. Shows two worlds becoming one world, like our family. Through tears of joy, Cordelia placed the headband on her brow. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever owned, she whispered, embracing the boy who'd already become her son in all the ways that mattered. As autumn approached and it came time to return to Cedar Hollow, Cordelia felt a wrench at leaving this community that had welcomed her so completely. But she also felt excitement about applying what she'd learned to their life in the valley. We'll come back next spring, Kiani promised as they prepared for departure. And perhaps some of them will come to visit us as well. All are welcome, Cordelia agreed, meaning it absolutely. The journey home took them through familiar territory now made new by her changed perspective. She saw the valley not just as her refuge, but as a place where two worlds could truly meet and create something beautiful together. Their cabin, expanded again during the summer by visiting Apache relatives, now bore decorations from both cultures. Apache rugs warmed floors that also held Cordelia's grandmother's rocking chair. Traditional pottery shared shelves with her collection of books. The garden grew both European vegetables and native plants used for food and medicine. On their first night home, as they sat on the porch watching stars emerge in the familiar sky, Ayana curled between his parents with the wooden horse that had started it all. Are you happy we waited 3 days? Cordelia asked her husband, remembering that desperate afternoon when his arrow had changed everything. I am happy for every day that led us here, Kiani replied, his voice rich with contentment. Even the hard ones, even the lonely ones. They made us people who could build this. And what is this exactly? She teased. This is family. This is home. This is proof that love does not conquer, love creates. It makes new worlds from old ones. He pressed a kiss to her hair. This is thunder that goes on forever. As if summoned by his words, real thunder rumbled across the valley, promising the gentle rain their lake garden needed. Cordelia smiled, thinking of all the storms they'd weathered and all the growth those storms had brought. She'd waited 3 days for an Apache warrior to claim her. Instead, she'd found a partner, a son, and a life larger than any she'd dared imagine. The thunder would indeed continue, but she was no longer afraid of the storm. The celebration that followed blended traditions with joyous chaos. Apache drummers played alongside Prudence Millfield's squeaky violin. Traditional fry bread shared tables with Cordelia's famous apple pie. Children from both communities chased each other through the meadow while their parents shared stories and tentatively built bridges between worlds. As evening approached and the festivities wound down, Cordelia found herself standing with her new husband at the edge of the meadow, watching their son teach white children an Apache game involving painted stones. "No regrets?" Kiani asked softly, his arm warm around her shoulders. "Only that we waited so long," she replied, leaning into his strength. "Though perhaps we needed that time to become people worthy of this. My first wife used to say that Great Spirit has perfect timing, not early, not late, but exactly when hearts are ready to hold what they're given. Wise woman." "Both my wives are wise women," Kiani said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I am very fortunate, man." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they made their way to the cabin, now their home, expanded with an additional room Kiani had built during their courtship. It would serve them well until spring, when they planned to build a larger house that could accommodate their growing dreams. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing their valley in pristine snow that transformed the familiar landscape into something magical. For Cordelia, now Cordelia Ironcloud, the season became a time of discovery and deepening bonds. The household settled into rhythms that surprised her with their natural harmony. Kiani rose before dawn to tend their expanded livestock and check trap lines. Cordelia maintained her garden's winter preparations while learning to prepare traditional Apache foods from dried stores and preserved game. Ayana divided his time between his father's lessons in tracking and survival, and Cordelia's instruction in reading and arithmetic. "Numbers are like tracks in snow," the boy observed one December afternoon as they worked through multiplication tables by firelight. "Each one tells story, shows you which way to go next." "That's a beautiful way to think about it," Cordelia smiled, marveling at how the child's mind made connections she'd never considered. "Your father is teaching you well." "Father teaches tracking and hunting and how to read sky for weather," Ayana agreed, "but you teach different kind of seeing. Like when you showed me how words on page make pictures in mind, or how numbers can solve problems even when you're not sure what problem is yet." Through the long evenings, Kiani shared stories of his people, not the sanitized tales she'd heard before, but real histories filled with complexity, triumph, and heartbreak. In return, she read aloud from her books, watching his face as he discovered new worlds through Dickens and Shakespeare, poetry and philosophy. "Your people have many words for same feeling," he observed one night as she finished reading from Wordsworth. "Apache language is more direct, but sometimes indirect path shows beauty that straight path misses." "Like our courtship," Cordelia said, settling closer to him on the crude but comfortable sofa he'd built. "If you'd simply asked me to marry you that first day, I might have said no from fear alone. And if I had been wiser, man, I might have asked my son's advice much sooner." Kiani chuckled, his arm tightening around her. "He understood your heart before I understood my own." Their physical relationship had developed with the same patient care as their emotional bond. Kiani had been prepared to wait as long as necessary for Cordelia to feel ready for intimacy. But to his surprise, she'd been the one to initiate their first kiss 3 days after their wedding. "I'm done being afraid," she told him simply, and he'd understood that this was her gift to him, not just her body, but her trust, her willingness to be vulnerable with someone who could crush her simply by being careless with her heart. Now, 3 months later, their intimacy had grown into something that surprised them both with its depth. This wasn't the gentle, predictable love she'd known with Jeremiah, nor the passionate but sometimes turbulent romance Kiani had shared with his first wife. This was something entirely new, a partnership of equals who chose each day to build something beautiful together. "Cordelia," Kiani said one evening as they prepared for bed, "I have been thinking about spring." "Oh, what about spring?" "Ihana will need to spend time with my mother's people, learn more of our ways before he becomes man. It is tradition." He seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "Usually, whole family goes. But I know this is your home, your land. I will not ask you to leave if—" "When do we go?" Cordelia interrupted, surprising him. "When? You want to travel with us?" "Kiani Ironcloud, did you think I married you just to stay exactly the same person I was before?" She turned to face him fully, her eyes bright with anticipation. "I want to meet your family. I want to see the places that shaped you. I want our son to know all his heritage, from both sides. It will not be an easy journey, my people. Some still have hard feelings toward whites. Then I'll have to win them over, won't I?" Cordelia smiled, the expression fierce and determined. "Just like I won over a certain Apache warrior who thought he was beyond love." Kiani's laughter filled their bedroom, rich and deep as mountain spring water. "My mother is going to like you very much," he said, "and my sister. She will try to adopt you completely and keep you forever." "Good," Cordelia said, settling into his arms. "I'm ready to be kept forever." Spring came with the glory of wildflowers and rushing streams, and with it, the time for their journey to meet Kiani's extended family. The 3-week trek to the Apache settlement tested Cordelia's endurance but strengthened her resolve. She rode beside her husband and son, learning to read the sky for weather, to find water in seemingly barren places, to see the landscape through Apache eyes. "You are becoming a different person," Ayana observed on their 5th day out as Cordelia. Successfull, why tracked a rabbit using skills Kiane had taught her. "Different how?" she asked, though she could feel the changes herself, a confidence she'd never possessed, a sense of belonging to something larger than her small cabin and garden, stronger. "Like steel that has been in fire," the boy grinned. "Father calls you. She who walks between worlds when he talks to wind at night. Does he now?" Cordelia glanced at her husband, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "And what do the winds say back?" "They say you bring good medicine to our family. Make father remember how to sing." The Apache settlement, when they reached it, was nothing like the savage encampment she'd expected from dime novels. It was a well-organized community of perhaps 200 people, with sturdy dwellings, thriving gardens, and an obvious social structure based on respect and shared responsibility. Kiani's mother, Desba, was a woman of perhaps 60 with eyes like obsidian and a spine straight as a pine tree. She examined Cordelia with frank appraisal before speaking a rapid burst of Apache to her son. "What did she say?" Cordelia whispered. "She said you have strong hands and kind eyes, but she wants to know if you can cook something besides beans and hardtack." Kiani grinned. "I told her you make best apple pie in 3 territories. Then I'd better prove it." Cordelia laughed. The next months passed in a whirlwind of cultural immersion. Cordelia learned to weave baskets with geometric patterns that told stories, to prepare dozens of traditional dishes, to speak enough Apache to hold basic conversations. In return, she taught interested women to read and write, shared her knowledge of European-style gardening, and helped establish a small school for the settlement's children. But more importantly, she watched Ayana bloom in the company of his extended family. The boy who'd been wise beyond his years in the white world became simply a beloved child among his people. learning traditional skills while maintaining the broader perspective his mixed upbringing had given him. He will be bridge between worlds. Desba told Cordelia one evening as they worked together preparing food for a feast. The old woman had taken to speaking English when they were alone, though she pretended not to understand it in public. Like his new mother. "I hope I'm worthy of that responsibility," Cordelia replied. "Worth is not given as made one choice at a time," Desba said firmly. "You choose to come here, to learn our ways, to love Apache Boy as your own. You choose to make my son happy again after long sadness. These choices show worth more than words." The feast that night celebrated not just their visit, but Ayana's formal recognition as a member of both worlds, Apache by blood, but also inheritor of the settler determination and book learning his stepmother brought to his life.